The most dangerous mistake in a billion-dollar company is assuming the smartest person in the room is wearing a suit. The digital NASDAQ countdown glowed across the 20-foot screen in icy blue numbers as executives moved through Caldwell Dynamics' Executive Lounge with the polished confidence of people who believe the future belonged to them. Crystal glasses clinked softly. Italian leather shoes crossed polished marble floors. Somewhere near the back of the room, a violin version of Fly Me to the Moon drifted through hidden speakers while investors from New York, Chicago, and San Francisco reviewed final IPO projections on their tablets. Ethan Caldwell barely noticed any of it. At 38, the CEO of the fastest-growing fintech company in America had trained himself to ignore distractions. His attention stayed fixed on the glowing financial model projected across the glass conference wall beside him. Revenue trajectories, risk curves, volatility ratios. Numbers most people in the room pretended to understand. Ethan understood all of them, or at least he thought he did. 5 minutes until rehearsal begins, his CFO announced nervously, adjusting his tie. The board wants one last walkthrough before tomorrow morning's opening bell. Ethan nodded once without looking away from the projections. Relax, Daniel. We already survived SEC review. Tomorrow is just theater. A few executives laughed quietly. The tension loosened. Ethan finally reached for the untouched espresso beside him, only to realize it had gone cold nearly an hour ago. Typical. He lived like that lately. Cold coffee. 4 hours of sleep. Constant movement. Constant pressure. Across the room, Clara Bennett quietly replaced a tray of empty glasses near the investor tables. No one noticed her. That was normal. Waitresses at executive events weren't supposed to be remembered, especially not waitresses like Clara. Quiet. Plain black uniform. Blonde hair tied neatly behind her head. Soft gray eyes that rarely stayed in one place long enough for anyone important to care. She moved carefully between conversations worth more than most people's mortgages, carrying fresh coffee and sparkling water, while billion-dollar decisions floated through the air around her like perfume. But unlike everyone else in the room, Clara kept looking at the numbers. Not casually, not accidentally, intently. Her eyes narrowed slightly every time the volatility projection appeared on screen. Something about it bothered her. At first, she assumed she was tired. She had worked a double shift already. Her feet ached. Her shoulders burned from carrying trays since 6 that morning. But then the graph appeared again. And this time, Clara stopped walking completely. Her pulse slowed. No, that couldn't be right. She glanced back toward the giant screen. The assumption model was inverted. Tiny mistake. Almost invisible, but not invisible enough. Clara felt her stomach tighten. She looked around instinctively, half expecting someone else to notice. No one did. The executives continued talking confidently about valuation ceilings and expansion forecasts, while the incorrect model sat glowing behind them like a loaded gun no one realized was pointed at their own company. Miss? One investor said impatiently, gesturing toward his empty glass. Clara blinked and immediately stepped forward. Of course, sir. Her voice stayed calm, professional, invisible again. But her mind wouldn't let go of the equation. She poured sparkling water slowly while listening to Ethan explain future earnings projections near the conference wall. Every sentence made the problem worse, because the error wasn't small anymore. It multiplied through every projection after quarter 3. Clara could practically see the collapse unfolding in her head. Inflated confidence. Mispriced risk. Investor panic. Stock crash. Lawsuits. The kind of mistake people spent careers pretending they didn't make. Ethan picked up a black marker and began writing directly onto the glass wall beside the projection. Confident strokes. Sharp handwriting. As you can see, he said smoothly, our downside exposure remains mathematically insignificant under current market conditions. Clara froze. Her eyes locked onto one number near the denominator. Then another. The tray in her hands suddenly felt heavier. Around her, everyone nodded, approvingly at the CEO's brilliance. No one questioned him. No one even looked uncertain. That was the problem with powerful men, Clara thought quietly. Eventually, people stopped checking their math. Ethan underlined the final equation and turned toward the room with calm satisfaction. Any questions? Silence. Admiration. Confidence. Then, from somewhere near the back of the lounge, a soft voice broke through the room, so quietly it almost disappeared beneath the music. Your denominator is reversed. The room went completely still. For one strange second, nobody moved. The violin music continued softly through the ceiling speakers, but inside the executive lounge, the sound suddenly felt distant. Ethan Caldwell stared toward the back of the room, his expression unreadable. Clara immediately regretted speaking, not because she thought she was wrong, because every eye in the room had turned toward her at once. Investors, executives, assistants, men in $1,000 suits holding crystal glasses paused mid-conversation to look at the waitress standing near the beverage station like she had accidentally wandered onto the wrong movie set. Daniel Mercer, the company's chief financial officer, let out a short laugh first. Nervous. Sharp. I am sorry, he said, glancing around the room. Did the catering staff just critique our market model? A few people chuckled politely. Clara felt heat rise into her cheeks, but she kept her posture steady. She had learned long ago that embarrassment only grew stronger when people saw it. Ethan slowly capped the black marker in his hand. What exactly did you say? His voice was calm. Too calm. Clara swallowed once. The denominator in your volatility adjustment model, she said quietly. It is reversed. Another silence. Longer this time. Daniel shook his head immediately. That is impossible. We have had 6 analysts verify these projections. Clara nodded once. Then all 6 analysts copied the same mistake. A soft murmur spread through the room. Ethan studied her carefully now. Really studied her for the first time all evening. Not the uniform. Not the tray in her hands. Her eyes. Calm eyes. Intelligent eyes. The kind that only stayed steady under pressure when they trusted what they knew. Ethan walked slowly back toward the glass wall covered in equations. Show me. Daniel blinked. Ethan, come on. I said show me. Clara hesitated. Every instinct told her to apologize and disappear back into the kitchen before security escorted her out of the lounge forever. But the numbers on the screen stayed burned into her mind. Wrong numbers. Dangerous numbers. She carefully set the silver tray onto a nearby table and crossed the room while dozens of executives watched her like she was walking onto a stage she had no business standing on. Her black shoes barely made a sound against the marble floor. Ethan handed her the marker without speaking. Clara took it slowly. Her fingers trembled just slightly before steadying again. Then she turned toward the equation. Right here, she said softly, circling a section near the lower corner of the model. Your downside coefficient assumes inverse stabilization after quarter 3, but your denominator is flipped, which artificially compresses exposure. Daniel folded his arms immediately. That is intentional. Clara glanced toward him. No, it only appears intentional because the second model compensates for it later. She wrote 3 short corrections beneath the original equation. Simple, precise, clean handwriting. The room remained silent except for the soft scratching of marker against glass. Ethan's expression changed almost imperceptibly as he followed the calculations. Clara continued carefully. The corrected denominator increases volatility by nearly 11% under high-rate conditions. Daniel scoffed. 11% is insignificant at our scale. Clara looked at him directly for the first time. Not before an initial public offering. Silence crashed into the room again. One of the younger analysts suddenly stepped closer to the screen, tablet still in his hands. His eyes moved rapidly between Clara's corrections and the original model. Then his face drained of color. Wait, he whispered. Oh my God. Daniel frowned immediately. What? The analyst looked toward Ethan. She is right. Nobody breathed. If market pressure spikes after launch, the analyst continued carefully. Our downside exposure multiplies through every institutional projection after Q3. The valuation could be overstated by several $billion. Several investors lowered their glasses slowly. Someone near the back muttered a quiet curse under his breath. Daniel's confidence vanished almost instantly. He grabbed another tablet from the conference table and began scrolling through spreadsheets faster now, his fingers suddenly unsteady. Ethan never moved. He kept staring at the corrected equation on the glass wall like it had personally insulted him. Clara stepped backward immediately. I am sorry, she said softly. I should not have interrupted. But nobody answered her. Because for the first time that night, the most powerful people in the room were no longer looking at Ethan Caldwell. They were looking at the waitress standing beside his equation. Ethan finally spoke without taking his eyes off the glass. What is your name? Clara hesitated. Clara Bennett. Ethan nodded once slowly. And where exactly does a waitress learn stochastic volatility modeling? Clara's fingers tightened slightly around the marker, just enough for Ethan to notice. Nowhere important, she said quietly. Then she placed the marker back into his hand and walked away while the entire room remained frozen behind her. The executive lounge no longer sounded like a celebration. Conversations had turned quieter now, sharper. Investors stood in small clusters near the windows overlooking Manhattan, speaking in lowered voices while analysts rechecked projections across glowing laptop screens. The confidence from earlier had cracked. Not loudly, quietly, like ice thinning beneath expensive shoes. Clara moved quickly through the room collecting empty glasses, pretending not to notice the stares following her now. 30 minutes ago, nobody had known she existed. Now every executive seemed to glance at her twice before speaking. She hated it. Attention always came with questions. Questions always led to complications. Clara. She stopped instantly. Ethan Caldwell stood near the glass conference wall, one hand in his pocket, the other, holding a tablet filled with revised calculations. Up close, he looked different than he had from across the room earlier. Less polished somehow. The confidence was still there, but something else sat underneath it now. Curiosity. Dangerous curiosity. Clara turned carefully. Yes, sir. Ethan glanced briefly toward the kitchen doors where staff members disappeared in and out carrying trays. Walk with me. It was not a request. Several executives nearby looked visibly uncomfortable as Ethan led the waitress toward the quieter hallway connecting the executive lounge to the private conference suites. Their footsteps echoed softly against dark marble floors while city lights shimmered through floor-to-ceiling windows beside them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Ethan finally stopped near a silent conference room overlooking Midtown. You embarrassed my chief financial officer tonight. Clara looked down slightly. That was not my intention. No. Ethan studied her carefully. Then what exactly was your intention? Clara folded her hands calmly in front of her apron. To stop your company from making a very public mistake. Ethan let out a quiet breath through his nose. Not quite a laugh. Most people in this building are terrified to correct me. Most people in this building probably depend on you for their paycheck. Ethan's eyebrows lifted slightly. Honest answer. No hesitation. Again, he opened the glass conference room door and motioned for her to step inside. Clara hesitated only briefly before entering. The room smelled faintly of leather chairs and cold coffee. Screens along the walls displayed market forecasts and media headlines about Caldwell Dynamics' historic public offering scheduled for the next morning. Ethan remained standing while Clara stayed near the doorway. Neither fully trusted the situation yet. You said the correction changes our risk exposure by 11%, Ethan said. Actually, 12.4 under aggressive rate movement. Ethan stared at her for 2 full seconds. You memorized the recalculation? Clara looked confused. It was not difficult. Ethan almost smiled at that. Almost. Instead, he set the tablet onto the conference table and crossed his arms. Who are you really? The question lingered heavily in the room. Clara's eyes drifted briefly toward the glowing skyline outside the windows before returning to him. I am a waitress. No, Ethan said quietly. You are someone pretending to be one. The words landed harder than Clara expected. She looked away immediately. Ethan noticed that too. People lied with words all the time. But discomfort usually arrived before the lie did. MIT, he asked suddenly. Clara blinked once. What? Stanford? Princeton? Where did you study? She stayed silent. Ethan stepped closer to the conference table, lowering his voice slightly. You do not calculate stochastic exposure corrections in your head because you took a community college algebra class. Clara finally answered without looking at him. Princeton. Ethan's expression changed instantly. Princeton. Applied mathematics. You graduated? A small pause. No, Ethan waited. Clara could feel him studying her now the same way he probably studied market behavior before making billion-dollar decisions. Looking for patterns, weaknesses, missing information. Why leave? He asked softly. Clara stared toward the city lights beyond the glass windows. Somewhere far below them, yellow taxis moved through Manhattan traffic like streams of light. Life changed. Ethan recognized avoidance immediately, but he also recognized pain. Not dramatic pain. Quiet pain. The kind disciplined people carried without discussing it. Clara straightened slightly. I should get back to work. Ethan did not answer right away. Instead, he picked up the tablet again and glanced toward the corrected equations. Do you understand what happens tomorrow if those projections go public without revision? Clara nodded once. Your valuation spikes too high during opening. And after investors discover the exposure, the stock collapses. Ethan watched her carefully. You say that very calmly. Clara gave a faint shrug. Numbers are calm. People are the ones who panic. For the first time that evening, Ethan Caldwell actually laughed. Short, genuine, surprised. Clara looked slightly startled by the sound. Ethan noticed that too. You know what is strange? He said quietly. I have spent 10 years building a company filled with Ivy League analysts. His eyes shifted toward her black waitress uniform. And tonight the smartest person in the building was carrying a coffee tray. Clara lowered her eyes immediately. That is not true. No, Ethan said softly. Then why did none of them catch it except you? Clara had no answer for that. Because deep down, she already knew the truth. Intelligence was not what made people listen. Status was. By 11:30 that night, the celebration had completely transformed into damage control. Conference rooms across the 42nd floor stayed lit, while analysts rebuilt valuation models line by line under crushing pressure. Half-empty espresso cups covered tables beside stacks of revised projections. Tension floated through the building like static electricity. Nobody smiled anymore. Ethan Caldwell stood alone inside his private office overlooking Manhattan, jacket removed, sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. Rain had started outside sometime after 10, streaking softly across the glass skyline, while thousands of white headlights crawled below through wet streets. On the massive screen behind his desk, financial simulations continued updating in real time. Every revised scenario led to the same conclusion. Clara Bennett had saved the company from a catastrophic launch. Ethan rubbed one hand across his jaw slowly. He hated being wrong. More than that, he hated not seeing something first. His entire reputation had been built on precision, prediction, control. Yet somehow, a waitress carrying sparkling water had identified a flaw his executive team completely missed. A quiet knock interrupted his thoughts. Come in. Daniel Mercer stepped inside looking exhausted. His tie hung loose now, and the confidence from earlier had vanished entirely. The revised projections are stable, Daniel said carefully. We can still proceed tomorrow if legal approves the updated filings before 6 in the morning. Ethan nodded once. Good. Daniel hesitated. About the girl. Ethan looked up immediately. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. You really think we should keep involving her in this? Ethan leaned back slowly in his chair. She caught an error your entire department missed. She is still a waitress. Ethan's eyes sharpened instantly. And you are still wrong. Silence. Daniel looked away first. Ethan stood and walked toward the rain-covered windows overlooking the city. Do you know what bothers me most? He asked quietly. It is not that we missed the error. Daniel stayed silent. It is that nobody below your level felt comfortable questioning it. Ethan turned back toward him. A healthy company does not fear correction. Daniel folded his arms defensively. With respect, Ethan, companies also need structure. You cannot have service staff interrupting executive presentations every time they have an opinion. Ethan stared at him for a long moment. You still think tonight was about confidence? Daniel frowned slightly. Ethan's voice lowered. It was about competence. Another silence settled between them before Ethan finally walked back toward his desk. I want a complete background report on Clara Bennett by morning. Daniel blinked. You already ran one? Not yet. Ethan's expression darkened slightly. Because unlike you, I prefer facts before assumptions. Daniel nodded stiffly and left without another word. The office fell quiet again except for rain tapping softly against the windows. Ethan glanced toward the cold espresso sitting untouched near his desk, then toward the legal pad beside it. On the top page, he had rewritten Clara's corrected equation 3 separate times already. Each time, the conclusion stayed exactly the same. She was right. His phone buzzed suddenly across the desk. A new email notification. Ethan opened it automatically. Preliminary personnel file attached. Clara Bennett, 26 years old. Current employment through Manhattan Elite Hospitality Services. No criminal history. No social media presence. Ethan frowned immediately. No social media at all felt unusual in 2026. He continued scrolling. Former Princeton University student. Applied mathematics and quantitative economics. Full academic scholarship. Ethan stopped reading for a second. Perfect GPA. National mathematics competitions. Published undergraduate research at 19. Then suddenly, the record ended. Withdrawal from Princeton during junior year. No graduate school. No finance positions. No corporate work history. Just restaurants. Diners. Hotels. Waitress jobs stretching back nearly 6 years. Ethan stared at the screen quietly. None of it made sense. Brilliant people did not simply disappear into service work without reason. His eyes moved lower through the report until one final note caught his attention. Family records attached. Ethan opened the file slowly. Father deceased. Construction accident. Younger brother, Noah Bennett, diagnosed with severe autism spectrum disorder. Primary caretaker listed, Clara Bennett. Ethan leaned back slowly in his chair as the pieces finally shifted together in his mind. Scholarship student. Family tragedy. Caregiver responsibilities. Financial collapse. Quiet intelligence buried beneath survival. Outside the windows, thunder rolled softly over Manhattan. Ethan closed the file, but did not move for several seconds afterward. Suddenly, he remembered the way Clara had stood in front of the glass wall earlier that night. Calm. Focused. Never trying to impress anyone. She had not corrected the equation to humiliate him. She had corrected it because leaving it wrong physically bothered her. Ethan understood people well enough to recognize the difference. Most executives he knew used intelligence like a weapon. Clara used hers like responsibility. His office door opened again softly. This time it was his assistant, Lauren. The catering staff is leaving for the night, she said carefully. Do you still need anything? Ethan glanced toward the rain outside, then toward the file still glowing on his desk. Actually, he said quietly, ask Clara Bennett to wait. Lauren looked surprised. At midnight. Ethan's eyes remained fixed on the city lights beyond the glass. Yes. A pause. Tell her I would like to offer her a job. The rain had grown heavier by the time Clara finished stacking the final trays in the service kitchen. Most of the catering staff had already gone home, their tired voices fading down the employee hallway one by one. Midnight shifts always ended the same way in Manhattan. Surf feet, cold hands, silent elevators. Clara tied the strings of her black apron slowly, trying not to think about the conversation upstairs. But her mind kept replaying the same moment over and over again. Your denominator is reversed. She still could not believe she had said it out loud. Clara. Lauren stood in the kitchen doorway holding a tablet against her chest. Mr. Caldwell would like to speak with you before you leave. Clara looked up immediately. Her stomach tightened. Did I do something wrong? Lauren hesitated. I do not think so. That answer somehow felt worse. 5 minutes later, Clara stood outside Ethan Caldwell's private office with rainwater shimmering across the giant windows behind her. The entire executive floor had quieted now. Most conference rooms were empty except for a few exhausted analysts still rebuilding projections under fluorescent light. Clara suddenly became very aware of her appearance. Wrinkled uniform, hair falling loose after 14 hours of work, sneakers instead of heels. She looked nothing like the people who belonged on this floor. Ethan looked up from his desk as she entered. Thank you for staying. Clara nodded politely. Your assistant said you wanted to speak with me. Ethan gestured toward the chair across from his desk. Sit down. Clara hesitated before sitting carefully near the edge of the leather chair, posture straight, hands folded quietly in her lap. Ethan noticed immediately that she sat like someone prepared to leave at any second. You worked at Princeton's quantitative research department during your sophomore year, Ethan said calmly. Clara's expression changed instantly. Very small, but enough. Ethan continued. Your paper on predictive instability modeling was cited by 2 investment journals. Clara looked down at her hands. You read my file. I did. Silence settled softly between them. Rain tapped against the windows while distant thunder rolled somewhere above the city. Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair. Why are you working as a waitress? Clara gave a faint smile without humor. Because hospitals do not accept theoretical mathematics papers as payment. Ethan said nothing. Clara stared toward the skyline beyond the glass windows. After my father died, my brother needed full-time care. My mother got sick 6 months later. Her voice stayed calm. Too calm. The kind of calm people learned after repeating painful facts too many times. Princeton stopped mattering after that. Ethan studied her carefully. No self-pity. No bitterness. Just exhaustion hidden beneath discipline. You could have gone back. Clara nodded slightly. Maybe. Ethan frowned. That does not sound convincing. Clara looked toward him finally. Do you know what happens when someone in your family needs constant care? Ethan stayed silent. Time disappears, she said softly. You stop planning years ahead. You start thinking in grocery bills and prescription refills, and whether your brother had a good day or a bad one. Her fingers tightened slightly together. Dreams become expensive. Ethan looked away for a moment. Something about the sentence stayed with him longer than he expected. Dreams become expensive. Clara straightened slightly. I should probably go. My subway line slows down after 1 in the morning. I want to offer you a position here. Clara blinked once. What? Ethan slid a folder slowly across the desk toward her. Quantitative Strategy Division. Senior Market Analyst. Clara stared at the folder, but did not touch it. Ethan continued carefully. Salary starts at $300,000 annually, plus equity. Silence. Complete silence. Clara actually looked toward the office door briefly, as if she expected someone else to walk in laughing at the joke. You cannot be serious. I am completely serious. Clara shook her head immediately. Mr. Caldwell, I have not worked in finance before. Ethan almost smiled. Neither had half the people who built this company. Clara still did not touch the folder. You do not even know me. I know your entire executive team missed a catastrophic valuation error, Ethan said quietly. And a waitress carrying coffee caught it in under 30 seconds. Clara lowered her eyes immediately. That does not mean I belong here. Ethan stood slowly and walked toward the rain-covered windows overlooking Manhattan. You know what I realized tonight? He asked softly. Clara stayed silent. Ethan looked out over the city lights below. This company became successful because we hired people with impressive resumes. He turned slightly toward her. But somewhere along the way, we stopped noticing actual intelligence unless it arrived wearing a tailored suit. Clara looked down at the unopened folder in front of her. Her reflection stared back faintly from the polished desk surface. Waitress uniform. Tired eyes. Brilliant mind buried beneath survival. Ethan's voice softened slightly behind her. I think you stopped noticing yourself too. For the first time that entire night, Clara Bennett did not know what to say. Clara barely slept that night. The folder Ethan Caldwell had handed her sat unopened on the small kitchen table of her Brooklyn apartment while rain tapped softly against the fire escape outside. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the muted sound of late-night traffic drifting through cracked windows. Across the room, Noah sat cross-legged on the couch wearing oversized headphones, carefully lining up colored puzzle pieces across the coffee table with intense concentration. Clara watched him silently from the kitchen sink while reheating leftover soup in the microwave. Everything about the evening still felt unreal. Senior Market Analyst. $300,000 a year. Equity. The numbers sounded absurd inside a 2-bedroom apartment with peeling paint and second-hand furniture. Noah suddenly looked up. You are staring again, he said softly. Clara blinked. Sorry. Noah tilted his head slightly, studying her the way he always did when he sensed something unusual. Bad day. Clara hesitated. Strange day. Noah nodded once as if that explained everything. In many ways, it did. Clara sat beside him on the couch and opened the folder slowly for the first time. Official contracts. Executive onboarding documents. Confidentiality agreements. Her name printed neatly beside Caldwell Dynamics corporate logo. She stared at it quietly. Noah glanced toward the papers. Is that another restaurant job? Clara smiled faintly. Not exactly. Then why do you look scared? The question landed too accurately. Clara looked down at the contract in her hands. Because sometimes your life changes before your brain catches up. Noah considered that carefully while adjusting the edge of one puzzle piece exactly 3 times. Will you still make pancakes on Saturdays? Clara laughed softly despite herself. Yes. Then it is probably okay. Clara looked at her younger brother for a long moment. Noah always reduced complicated things into simple truths. It was one of the reasons she loved him so fiercely. Her phone buzzed suddenly against the kitchen counter. Unknown number. Clara hesitated before answering. Hello. You are awake. Ethan Caldwell's voice sounded calmer now than it had all evening. Clara immediately sat straighter. Mr. Caldwell. Ethan is fine. Clara glanced instinctively at the contract again. Right. A small silence followed. You did not sign the papers, Ethan said. It was not a question. Clara frowned slightly. How would you know that? Because if you had, my legal department would already be celebrating. Clara almost smiled. Almost. Ethan continued more carefully this time. You do not trust the offer. Clara looked toward the rain-streaked windows. Would you? Ethan leaned back quietly in his office chair nearly 10 miles away. He had not gone home yet either. The revised IPO filings still covered half the screens in his office while exhausted executives slept in conference rooms downstairs. But somehow he kept thinking about the waitress from Brooklyn staring at a contract that could completely change her life. No, he admitted. I probably would not. Clara appreciated the honesty more than she expected. Ethan's voice lowered slightly. Come to the office tomorrow morning before the market opens. Clara frowned. Why? Because there is something I want you to see before you make your decision. Clara hesitated. I do not belong in your office, Ethan. Silence. Then his answer came quietly. That is exactly the problem. The line disconnected softly afterward. Clara stared at the dark phone screen for several seconds before setting it down again. Noah looked over from the couch. Was that the billionaire math guy? Clara blinked. The what? The billionaire math guy, Noah repeated calmly. The one making your forehead wrinkle. Clara laughed quietly again, shaking her head. You make him sound like a supervillain. Noah returned to arranging puzzle pieces. Maybe he is. The next morning, Manhattan looked silver beneath low clouds and early rain. Clara stood outside Caldwell Dynamics headquarters wearing the only blazer she owned, purchased years ago for Princeton presentations she never got to finish. It fit slightly loose now. The sleeves were worn near the wrists. But it was clean. Professional enough. She stared up at the enormous glass tower stretching into the gray morning sky while yellow taxis rushed past behind her. Employees streamed through the revolving doors carrying coffee cups and designer briefcases without noticing her standing there. Same city, same building. Yet everything felt different now. Clara tightened her grip on the leather folder against her chest and stepped inside. The marble lobby gleamed beneath white lights while giant television screens displayed financial headlines about Caldwell Dynamics' historic market debut scheduled in less than 2 hours. Suddenly, every employee near the elevators slowed slightly as they recognized her. The waitress. Whispered conversations followed quietly through the lobby. Clara felt the attention immediately. Uncomfortable. Sharp. One executive actually stared openly before murmuring something to his colleague. Clara lowered her eyes instinctively and headed toward the security desk. Then a voice echoed clearly across the lobby behind her. Miss Bennett. The entire room seemed to pause. Ethan Caldwell himself walked directly across the marble floor toward her in a charcoal suit and dark overcoat, ignoring the stunned expressions surrounding them. He stopped beside her calmly. You came. Clara looked up carefully. I am still deciding. Ethan nodded once. Good. Then, in front of the entire executive lobby, the billionaire CEO held open the private elevator door himself for the former waitress. The private elevator rose silently through 42 floors of polished glass and steel while Clara stood beside Ethan Caldwell without speaking. Soft instrumental music played overhead, almost drowned out by the faint hum of machinery beneath the floor. Clara kept both hands wrapped tightly around the leather folder against her chest. She could still feel the eyes from the lobby following her upward. Ethan noticed. You are uncomfortable with attention, he said quietly. Clara gave a faint smile. Attention usually means someone is about to lose patience with me. Ethan glanced toward her reflection in the mirrored elevator wall. That says more about the people around you than it does about you. Clara looked down instead of answering. The elevator doors opened onto the executive strategy floor. Unlike the busy lobby below, this level felt almost unnaturally calm. Thick carpets muted footsteps. Glass offices stretched along both sides of the hallway overlooking Manhattan through massive windows filled with gray morning light. Employees stopped speaking the moment Ethan and Clara stepped onto the floor together. Some tried to hide their surprise. Others did not bother. Clara recognized several faces from the previous night. Analysts, executives, people who had watched her correct the company's financial model while carrying a silver tray. Ethan walked calmly past all of them as if none of the staring mattered. Clara followed half a step behind, increasingly aware of how different she looked from everyone else around her. Expensive suits, luxury watches, perfect posture. Then her worn blazer from college. Scuffed shoes hidden beneath tailored pants she had borrowed from a former coworker. "Good morning, Ethan," one executive greeted carefully. His eyes flicked toward Clara immediately afterward. Ethan did not slow down. "Morning." The executive waited for an introduction that never came. By the time they reached the main conference room, tension already floated through the entire floor. Inside, nearly 20 senior employees sat around a massive walnut table reviewing final IPO documentation. Several conversations stopped instantly when Clara entered. Behind Ethan, Daniel Mercer looked especially unhappy. "Ethan," he said carefully, "we are about to begin the final investor call." Ethan removed his overcoat calmly. "Good." Daniel glanced toward Clara. "And she is here because—" Ethan pulled out a chair near the center of the table. "Because she found the mistake none of us caught." Silence spread through the room. Clara immediately shook her head slightly. "I do not need to stay for this." "Yes," Ethan said quietly. "You do." Daniel leaned forward with visible restraint. "Ethan, with respect, this is a confidential executive meeting." "Exactly," Ethan replied. "Which is why I would prefer at least one person in the room who understands the models." Several executives shifted uncomfortably. Clara could almost physically feel the room tightening around her now. Not anger exactly. Pride. Threatened pride. Ethan noticed that too. "Sit down, Clara." Slowly, reluctantly, she took the empty chair beside the digital projection wall. The same kind of wall where she had corrected Ethan's equation less than 12 hours earlier. Around the table, executives exchanged uncertain looks while legal teams organized documents near the far end of the room. Ethan finally addressed everyone. "The revised valuation model is stable. We proceed at market open." One board member frowned. "And the exposure risk?" Ethan nodded toward Clara. "Reduced by 12.4% after correction." Again, silence. Nobody missed the implication. Daniel folded his hands tightly together. "We appreciate Miss Bennett's observation yesterday, but perhaps we should avoid overstating her role." Clara looked down immediately. Ethan did not. "You think correcting a multi-billion-dollar forecasting error is overstating?" Daniel inhaled slowly. "I think one correct observation does not automatically qualify someone to sit in executive strategy meetings." Clara finally spoke softly before Ethan could respond. "He is right." Every head turned toward her. Clara kept her voice calm. "I do not belong at this table." Ethan looked at her carefully. "Why not?" Clara hesitated. "Because I have not earned it." Ethan stared at her for several seconds before turning toward the room. "Interesting." His voice remained calm. "Most people here think they earned their seats because of where they studied." His eyes moved slowly around the table. "Or because somebody important hired them." Nobody answered. Ethan continued quietly. "Clara Bennett earned her seat by preventing this company from humiliating itself in front of Wall Street." Daniel looked frustrated now. "That is not the point." "Then what is the point?" Ethan asked. Daniel opened his mouth, then stopped, because suddenly the room understood what nobody wanted to say out loud. Clara did not threaten them because she was wrong. She threatened them because she was right without needing permission first. Ethan turned back toward the projection screen. "Clara." She looked up carefully. Ethan handed her a digital stylus. "Walk them through the corrected risk structure." The room froze again. Clara stared at the stylus in silence. Ethan's voice softened slightly. "You already know how." Her fingers closed slowly around the pen. Across the conference room, several executives looked visibly uncomfortable while analysts quietly opened fresh documents. Clara stood carefully beside the projection wall, heart pounding beneath the calm expression she had practiced for years. The giant financial model glowed across the glass screen in pale blue numbers. For one brief second, she almost saw herself again at 19 years old inside Princeton lecture halls filled with equations and possibility. Then the memory disappeared. Clara looked toward the waiting executives around the table. Her voice stayed soft when she finally began. The original model assumed stabilization after Q3. The entire room fell silent and listened. At first, Clara's voice barely carried across the conference room. Soft, careful, like someone still expecting to be interrupted at any moment. "The original model assumed stabilization after Q3, she repeated, her eyes focused on the glowing projections instead of the executives watching her. But the denominator inversion distorted long-term volatility compression. She adjusted the model with the stylus, rewriting equations directly. onto the digital screen while numbers shifted in real time beside her. Slowly, the room changed. The tension remained, but something else replaced the skepticism now. Attention. Genuine attention. Clara moved through the projections calmly, explaining complex market behavior with the same quiet precision she once used carrying coffee trays between crowded Manhattan tables. No dramatic gestures. No arrogance. Just clarity. If interest rates spike even half a point above forecast, she continued softly, institutional confidence weakens faster than the original model predicts. One analyst near the far end of the table frowned while checking her numbers independently. Then his expression changed. She is right again. Daniel Mercer looked visibly irritated now, but even he stopped interrupting, because every recalculation kept leading to the same conclusion. Clara understood the system better than most of the executives who built it. Ethan watched from the head of the table without speaking. Not once did Clara try to impress the room. That was what fascinated him most. Brilliant people usually wanted recognition. Clara only cared whether the numbers were accurate. Nearly 40 minutes passed before she finally lowered the stylus. That is the corrected structure. Silence followed. Heavy silence. Then one of the board members slowly removed his glasses. "Miss Bennett," he said carefully, "how long have you been studying predictive market instability?" Clara hesitated slightly. "Since college." "And after college?" Clara looked down for half a second. "Life got busy." The older board member nodded quietly. No further explanation needed. Ethan finally stood from his chair. "Prepare the updated release documents," he told the legal team. "We move forward with Clara's revised model." Nobody argued this time. Around the table, executives quietly gathered their notes while analysts updated files for Market Open. Yet something fundamental inside the room had already shifted. Clara could feel it. Earlier that morning, people stared at her because she did not belong there. Now they stared because they were recalculating where she did belong. As the room slowly emptied, Ethan approached her near the projection wall. "You handled that well." Clara gave a faint shrug. "I used to present research findings in college." "You were good at it." Clara looked toward the windows overlooking Manhattan. Dawn light had finally begun breaking through the rain clouds outside, painting the skyline silver and pale gold. "I forgot that." Ethan studied her carefully. "No, I think you were forced to stop remembering." Clara did not answer. Her phone buzzed softly in her blazer pocket. She checked the screen immediately. "Noah." Her expression softened almost instantly as she answered quietly. "Hey." Ethan stepped back automatically to give her privacy, but he still caught fragments of the conversation. "Yes, I ate breakfast." A small smile touched Clara's face. "No, cereal does not count as cooking." Pause. Then softer. "I know you are nervous." Ethan watched the exhaustion disappear from her posture while she spoke to her younger brother. For the first time since meeting her, she looked less guarded. Younger somehow. "I will come home after work," she promised gently. "And yes, pancakes tomorrow." "I already said yes." She hung up a moment later and looked slightly embarrassed. "Sorry." Ethan shook his head once. "Your brother?" Clara nodded. "Noah." Ethan leaned lightly against the conference table beside her. "He seems important." Clara almost smiled. "He is the reason I survived the last 6 years." The honesty in her voice caught him off guard slightly. Before Ethan could respond, celebration suddenly erupted outside the conference room. Cheers. Applause. Phones ringing all at once. Both of them turned instinctively toward the hallway where analysts rushed past holding tablets with shocked expressions. Lauren hurried into the room breathlessly. The revised investor previews just went live. She looked directly at Ethan. "The market response is exploding." Ethan frowned slightly. "Good or bad?" Lauren laughed in disbelief. "Good." She handed him the tablet. "Very good." Ethan scanned the financial headlines quickly. Institutional confidence surges after revised transparency release. Caldwell Dynamics praised for proactive correction before IPO. Market analysts call leadership response unusually honest for Wall Street. Ethan stared at the screen silently. Then his eyes shifted toward Clara. "You just saved the company twice." Clara blinked. "What?" Ethan handed her the tablet. Most corporations hide mistakes until investors discover them first. Clara read the headlines quietly while morning sunlight reflected across the glass walls around them. "You admitted the error before launch," she realized softly. Ethan nodded once. "Because you reminded me something yesterday." Clara looked up carefully. What? Ethan's voice stayed calm. Smart people correct mistakes. His eyes moved briefly toward the glowing skyline beyond the windows. Arrogant people defend them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside the conference room, Caldwell Dynamics celebrated the strongest pre-market response in company history. But inside the quiet room, near the projection wall, Clara Bennett stood holding a financial tablet with trembling hands, slowly realizing her life had already changed. 3 months later, the cafeteria inside Caldwell Dynamics looked completely different. The old gray walls had been replaced with warm lighting and open seating areas where interns, analysts, assistants, and executives now sat together without invisible lines dividing them. Conversations filled the room naturally. Laptops stayed open beside coffee cups. Junior employees spoke more freely during meetings. Small changes at first, then larger ones. People inside the company started noticing something unusual after the IPO launch. Ethan Caldwell had stopped rewarding confidence alone. He started rewarding questions. Analysts who challenged assumptions received promotions instead of warnings. Meetings changed. The atmosphere changed. Even the executive floor felt less cold somehow. And at the center of all of it, whether she wanted the attention or not, was Clara Bennett. You still look uncomfortable every time someone recognizes you, Ethan said quietly one afternoon. Clara glanced up from the financial reports spread across her desk near the enormous office windows. Because they still stare. Ethan leaned lightly against her office doorway holding 2 coffees. That tends to happen when someone saves a multi-billion-dollar company before breakfast. Clara accepted the coffee with a small smile. You make it sound more dramatic than it was. Ethan handed her the cup carefully. That is because you still think what you did was normal. Clara looked down at the steam rising from the coffee between her hands. Her office still felt unreal sometimes. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. Dual monitor systems. Research teams asking for her opinion during strategy meetings. A salary larger than anything she had imagined while counting grocery money inside her Brooklyn apartment. Yet strangely, the thing she valued most was much smaller than all of that. Respect. Real respect. Not pity. Not surprise. Respect. Ethan watched her quietly from the doorway. Noah still likes the pancakes. Clara laughed softly. Every Saturday. Good. A comfortable silence settled briefly between them while afternoon sunlight reflected across the glass buildings outside. Ethan noticed the framed photo near the corner of her desk. Clara and Noah standing beside the East River wearing winter coats and laughing at something outside the frame. Genuine happiness. Ethan realized he had never once seen Clara display any bitterness about the years she lost. Only responsibility. You know, Ethan said thoughtfully, most people in this industry would resent what happened to them. Clara looked up. What do you mean? Having your future interrupted. Clara considered the question carefully before answering. I used to. Ethan stayed silent. Clara looked back toward the city skyline. But eventually, I realized life was not stealing from me. Her fingers rested lightly against the warm coffee cup. It was asking something difficult from me. Ethan studied her expression quietly. And now? Clara smiled faintly. Now I think maybe I survived it for a reason. Before Ethan could answer, movement outside the office windows caught their attention. Employees were gathering near the central trading screens throughout the floor. Excited voices spread rapidly through the building. Laughed softly under his breath. Clara frowned slightly. What? Ethan turned the screen toward her. Caldwell Dynamics stock had just surged another 18% after institutional investors praised the company's transparency reforms and revised leadership structure. Business channels across the country were already calling it one of the most trusted IPO launches in years. Clara stared at the screen quietly. Transparency reforms. Ethan nodded toward the crowded executive floor outside her office. Turns out investors appreciate companies that admit mistakes before the market discovers them. Clara smiled slightly. What a revolutionary concept. Ethan laughed again. Then his expression softened. You changed this company, Clara. She immediately shook her head. No, you changed it. Ethan looked toward the employees gathering outside. Analysts, assistants, interns, executives, people who now spoke more openly because someone invisible had finally been heard. Maybe, he admitted quietly, but you reminded me why it needed to change. A notification suddenly appeared across every digital screen throughout the executive floor. Company announcement from the office of the CEO. Employees slowed as the message expanded across monitors one by one. Clara frowned slightly. What did you do? Ethan gestured toward the glass walls outside her office. Look. Across the floor, workers stopped to read the announcement in silence. Effective immediately, Caldwell Dynamics would launch a scholarship and hiring initiative for students forced to leave academic programs due to family caregiving responsibilities or financial hardship. Full tuition assistance, flexible employment opportunities, research sponsorships. The initiative carried a simple title across the top of every screen. The Bennett Program. Clara looked at Ethan in complete shock. You did not tell me about this. Ethan shrugged lightly. You were busy correcting everyone's math. Clara's eyes filled slightly before she looked away toward the windows. Down below, Manhattan moved endlessly through afternoon sunlight, while reflections shimmered across the glass towers surrounding them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan noticed something sitting near the edge of Clara's desk. A small silver cafeteria sign mounted inside a simple black frame. The old sign from downstairs. Staff only. Ethan raised an eyebrow slightly. You kept that? Clara nodded once. To remind myself. Of what? Clara looked out across the company floor where interns now questioned executives without fear and analysts spoke up before problems became disasters. Her voice stayed soft when she answered. That sometimes the smartest person in the room is the one nobody bothered to